Thank you, Bob. 2 or 3 notes as I was listening to you. When you were talking about being a salesman and putting it together with your values, someone years ago had a definition of salesmanship, which I quite like. It was the transfer of a conviction from the mind of the seller to the mind of the buyer. And as for your volunteering, we do celebrate your years of volunteering, as we noted earlier, and thank you again for sharing with us today. And the study group, you're a great setup for my next privilege in the next few minutes of talking about some of these giant pioneers, because a lot of that came about in a study group, which you have also identified with. And I thought the most important thing I looked at, even when I was reading your notes before the meeting, is this moment of truth issue and your value system. That confidence to be able to ask the tough question, the confidence to be able to challenge the client if they try and get off too easy. And I think that comes from your conviction. And again, that's a transferable idea for all of us. So thank you again, Bob. Lawrence gave me the privilege this year of spending a few minutes to celebrate some of our giants in this industry who have really been very helpful in the formation of what we now know as the Conference for Advanced Life Underwriting. I don't have a timer in front of me, and I'm going to be more disciplined, but I certainly could go on for a long time on this subject. But let me start by describing 2 or 3 key events that were very influential in the formation and the motivation to form what we now know as KLU. In the late 80s, I was privileged to be part of what was known in the Life Underwriters Association as the Taxation and Legislation Committee, the T&L Committee. Now, historically, the CLHA and the companies would negotiate directly in Ottawa and anything to do with insurance and insurance agents. And we, the insurance agents, were somewhat brought along as pretty little pictures to be there, to be seen, and to be not heard. However, our T&L committee met with some members of the CLHA to discuss a new potential tax that was going to be imposed, and we were fundamentally opposed to it. In fact, we met as a group and met with the combined group of CLHA and the key companies and agreed that we would now go to Ottawa together and express our position with the Finance Department. And so we trotted off to Ottawa. And so we arrive in Ottawa, and I was rather shocked that about 10 minutes into the meeting, 2 of the key members of the CLHA committee, who were well-respected tax professionals, said, "You'll never get us to pay tax as an industry because we have too many loopholes in terms of our way we price the product from an actuarial standpoint. So the only way that you're going to get this tax is to tax the policyholder." And they gave them the formula, which we now sadly know from that day forward became the IIT tax, an internal tax of 15% tagged onto your policyholder and my policyholder because the companies were worrying about protecting their corporate tax. Needless to say, it was upsetting. And as I returned from Ottawa, I was very motivated to talk and share with some of our peers to say, it's time for us to stand up. It's time for us to take a stand on behalf of us, the agents. And it's time for us to stand up on behalf of our clients and not just be there with the 19,000 members that provide the lobbying power that the companies are using, yes, to protect their tax interests. And I'm not criticizing companies, but I'm saying that it was time for us to stand up on our 2 feet. And so that was a very impelling part of the motivation that led to KLU. The second reality goes back to 1989, and I chose to go to my office the other day and dig out of the archives a task force report on the Future Planning Committee of the Life Underwriters Association of Canada in 1989. Goes back a long way. I know some of you are glossing over and thinking, wow, I wasn't born or I wasn't in school. But please bear with me, because it's important. And so this task force began to look at where we were as an industry and recognized, among other things, that we needed to make some changes, and I'm just going to read 2 or 3 points that come out of this. One is that LUAC, and you can interpose advocates now, will represent membership interests providing a continuing program of professional development beyond LUATC. Beyond the basic education, we needed an educational forum for the advanced area of the market. We also were committed to interact with the government to create and sustain a favorable climate for the marketing of life insurance and related products and services by our membership. And thirdly, the LUAC would initiate a schedule of regular contacts with companies, regulators, and finance officials to enhance LUAC's influence as a significant, credible source for information, recommendation, and support on matters relevant to us. And it goes on several other points. I'll just skip to one summary. Recognizing the increasing need of competence in the complex, competitive, and demanding business, LUAC will engage in an ongoing process of professional development. It will deliver and support education, information, training, etc. I was privileged to chair that task force, and that task force included, this is even earlier than you folks, although it includes some of you, it included Bill Andrew, Don Glover, John Humphreys, George Perrin, Paul Virgin, Butch Bowden, Grant Fairley, Toby Hall, John Nicola, Cliff Sadgrove, and John Wall. That's 1989. That group evolved into a steering committee that began to meet and met over the next 18 months. But the third most significant thing that happened was along the way, and John Firstbrook mentioned it this morning, and thank you for acknowledging your bagman story. And John, I'm going to resist telling you another story that we could all remember about a boat, but we're not going to talk about that right now. Toby, I see you're smiling. The Tom McQuillan, Toby Hall study group, a lot of us went to every year, and we enjoyed the privilege of being up at, in some cases, Toby's farm, in some cases at, or Tom's farm, in some cases at Toby's cottage. One year, Toby had one of his friends, Ted Rogers, come over for dinner. And Ted began to talk to us throughout the evening after a few glasses of wine about what it was like to be in a regulated industry and the challenges he had. And I began to share with him some of this vision that we had in terms of going forward. And I never will forget this because he took me aside and said, well, how much do you think it's going to cost, Jim? I said, well, I think it's going to be between $1 and $2 million. And he said, well, I'll commit $1 million if you commit $1 million. Well, that's sort of reinforced the seed of going to the next stage. But instead of going to Ted, I chose then to go to Toby's office and say, Toby, I think it'll cost us about $1 million. If you'll backstop $500,000, I'll backstop $500,000, and then we'll get this off the ground. And so he assured me that he didn't want to do this, but if he had to, he'd be prepared to step forward. We then went for the next year's cottage meeting, and this is very relevant to Toby and his sales skills. And so we're sitting around having our usual chit-chat, and by then I'd broken it into pieces that we were going to ask a lot of people to come forward with $25,000 each, which was a lot of money. Toby jumped up and said, Jim, you obviously don't get it. You don't know how to sell insurance, which he was always critical of me, selling only these very large policies and not dealing with the numbers and the training that I was supposed to have had. That's another story. So now we get to his idea. He said, why don't you break it down like life insurance? We're going to create a deductible annual premium of $5,000. And so when you look at the financial backing that we now have at KLU, it really is a great credit to that study group and to Toby suggesting that I break down this large chunk of money into small bite-sized chunks that people could afford to pay on a regular basis. Just to show you how significant that became, as we went out and asked people to come forward and commit to being founding and charter members, people stood up. A lot of you are in this room. We have 62 founding members who came up and committed $25,000 in seed money. We called it practice insurance to try and ensure that we would be here today. We had another 45 who became charter members and committed to putting in $5,000 each, again, to help us put that seed capital together, and that has stood us well. These 23 years later, with several $1 million in the bank, that gives us the backbone to do what we need to do on behalf of the industry. So today, what I'd like to do is just briefly describe where we've come from in that 23 years, and then acknowledge more specifically this wonderful group of people. What have we done since 1991? The purpose of KLU was really to create, among other things, a unique meeting that people could come to every year to have leading-edge, state-of-the-art presentations that will help them to push into new markets and open up new ideas for the use of insurance, whether it's corporate or whether it's in the benefits area, et cetera. The other side of it was we also felt that it was essential that we become an activist not only with each other, but also in Ottawa. with the politicians, and they become aware of us, and not just singling out one company, one party, but all parties, to become actively involved in the political process. And thirdly, that we begin to be able to make presentations with Advocates and on behalf of Advocates and CALU with finance and other regulators. And yes, indeed, over the 23 years, we have done many of those things. We have been involved in upgrading the professional image of life insurance agents, and we now sit at the table with the Bar Association and the CICA and others when they negotiate on tax policy. We've become actively involved in tax policy issues, and together with Advocates, we represent this industry on issues related to tax policy when we deal with finance. Yes, we do have an annual meeting that's a leading-edge meeting that we would love all of you to begin to commit to and come as you're able to qualify for membership. It gives us a unique advantage to be peers sitting around the table like a sophisticated study group and learning from each other. And if you want more information on this, I refer you to Kevin and all the people sitting at this table who are going to be over in the booth helping you having more understanding of CALU. And see, I've done the shortest little speech that you could ever believe I would do on this. What I do want to do today is acknowledge some of those unique individuals who were very involved in that steering committee. That steering committee met for 18 months. We kept our own money. We paid our own travel. We kept all of our monies together, and we decided at the end that we would just donate it. And for 18 months, that small group committed to working on your behalf and our behalf. And I would like to recognize them today. I will ask you not to stand until I finish naming all of you. And then, if you hold your applause, we'll ask them to stand, and you can recognize them. You heard Bill Andrew today, and you heard Bill Andrew talk. Bill was one of those original founding members, and again, a leading agent for his company. One of the privileges I had in putting the team together was to pick the leading agents from almost every single company in Canada, and they were the giants with their peers, and I was this young kid at the time, surrounding myself with these people who were that powerful, and again, they would work together to do something unique. Butch Bowden, all of us have known Butch for his many, many years in this industry, and he was powerfully involved still at that stage on the board of LUAC and was a key member. My dear friend Grant Fairley, who couldn't be here this morning, was a skilled member. He and I had been actively involved at the top of the table for more than 30 years. He had put on programs, and he took the lead on developing all the programming. Toby Hall and Tom McQuillan, whose study group we celebrated and spent so many enjoyable times, really were the key behind the creativity in coming up with the financial model. Cliff Sadrove, who most of you may not know, a tremendous person, a key staff member of LUAC who is the major liaison with us in that steering committee for all these years. And this I've saved you to the last, John Humphreys. I met John years ago, and John made a presentation on why he was a volunteer and why he was a volunteer politically. And the power we had when we began to go to Ottawa and visit month by month by month is John opened all the doors for his friends he knew in politics. And we had the chance to meet with them and talk to them about the fact that we were going to have a different approach to negotiating. It wasn't going to be win-lose. It was going to be win-win. It was going to be even-handed to say, we want relationships. We're not just here to beg and push you for something. And so John was a key player in those early years in opening those doors politically and teaching the rest of us how to become more involved. Unfortunately, George Perrin at the last minute wasn't able to come today, and so we just acknowledge that George was a significant player also and lives in Ottawa and had other commitments today, and at the last minute wasn't able to come. I just want to acknowledge all these people because they are giants. Years ago, they would have been the main platform speakers every year at MDRT in different functions. They were the leaders of LUAC. And today, I look back 25 years ago, and I'd like all of you to stand at this table, and I'd like all of us to celebrate and acknowledge you. Thank you, gentlemen, for taking the time to come down today. And if you have a chance to visit with them, I think they may be out at the booth. And if you want to share their wisdom, you've heard from a couple of them today. and they have many, many years, hundreds of years of wisdom to share with you. And now I will turn the meeting over to Lawrence. Thank you very much.
And this is why. This is about masters. These guys are masters of the profession. They're masters of volunteering, as Bob has said. They are masters of participation, and we all learn from the masters. Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you very much. With this, and one more thing, I will be adjourning this part of the session, and that is to thank Jim Burton and PPI for the Gala luncheon, and to thank Jim Ruda for the excellent work he's been doing for us. Thank you all. We'll reconvene in half an hour.